हेलो सैसी नारी, थैंक यू फॉर ज्वाइनिंग मी टुडे। आज का एपिसोड मेरे प्रीवियस एपिसोड से थोड़ा अलग है इन द सेंस दैट इट्स अ मोर फ्री फ्लोइंग कॉन्वर्सेशन अराउंड मेंटल हेल्थ इन पॉप कल्चर। I am speaking with Tanmoy Goswami, who is a user survivor and the creator of Sanity, an independent mental health storytelling platform with a reader community spanning over 50 countries. He is a past fellow of the Reuters Institute University of Oxford and a LinkedIn top voice in social impact. He serves on lived experience panels and committees across the world and is a jury member for the Project Siren Awards that recognizes journalistic excellence on the topic of suicide prevention. After decades living in megacities, Tanmoy is now teaching his lungs to breathe again in a small mountain town. Alongside, he's trying to parent a 6-year-old and reparent himself. So he was also one of the lecturers in the Global Mental Health Leadership course I did last year, and that's how I came to know about his work. This one is a nuanced discussion for inquisitive minds and for people looking to bring about even a tiny change when it comes to mental health. We'll talk about the pros and cons of therapy speak becoming a part of everyday language, as in everyone throwing around terms like trauma, depression, OCD, etc. I've had an episode about a similar topic from a psychologist's point of view, but it's time to hear from a person like us who has a lived experience with mental health challenges. I and Tanmoy also discuss trauma dumping, the importance of acknowledging lived experiences, and other related topics that affect all of us. Please bear in mind that neither me nor Tanmoy is a mental health professional, and we are simply sharing our experiences and learnings in an attempt to help. The episode contains references to suicide and self-harm. Please use your discretion before listening. Please do follow Little Fixes on your podcast app and share this episode with someone you care about. Hey Sassy Nari, welcome to Little Fixes. This is your host Matri, a social media professional, a mother, and a simple yet sassy woman just like you. Join me for sweet, simple, and practical ideas that help you in transforming into your best self. This mental health and personal growth podcast is a reminder that you matter. And now to our guest. Hi Tanmoy, welcome to Little Fixes.
Hi Maitri, good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
So Tanmoy, we are going to talk about the usage of mental health terms in pop culture. But before that, we would like to know your story.
Well, thank you. I started experiencing mental health conditions when I was very young. It was only in college, however, that I got to actually meet a therapist. I was very fortunate. I was in a great college, and at that time, the UGC, I think, had mandated that every college should have mental health support. And that's where I first came to terms with the fact that what I have isn't just sort of garden variety anxiety or sadness, but something more serious potentially. So I've had a lifelong history of depression, anxiety disorders. I have a history of hypomania, self-harm, and suicidal ideation. And I was a business journalist up until COVID, which is when the organization that I used to work for, they shut down. And I had an oh shit moment because I was unprepared for it. I had never been laid off in my 16-year career up until then. So what I did was start a mental health newsletter, which combines sort of the rigor of research and analysis that I had developed as a journalist and the soul of lived experience. And that's what I do now. It's called Sanity by Tanmoy, sanitybytanmoy.com. And I call it an independent mental health storytelling platform, which sits at the intersection of mental health, culture, economics, politics, technology. And it is supported by readers from over 50 countries all across the world. I teach at various places. I do my own little advocacy. And yeah, I'm also trying to raise a 5-year-old. Well, actually, he just turned 6. So that's been an interesting ride, parenting while living with chronic mental health conditions. And I'm very fortunate to get to speak with people like you who are making a dent in this conversation. So yeah, thanks again.
Okay, so it was good knowing about you, Tanmay. And now, because you said that you were laid off during the pandemic, and a lot of people went through it. And I think that was the time where when a lot of awareness also started about these mental health issues. And as a person yourself who has been through these issues, how have you seen changes coming about, like before and after? Maybe what are your observations on the awareness about mental health issues?
I think I need to start with the disclaimer that um, I kind of tick all the boxes of privilege, right? I'm a cishet, upper caste, upper class man, English speaking man from the majority community. So I kind of tick all the boxes of privilege. If I were white, I would have ticked every single box. The only thing that I'm not is white. So for me, the idea of awareness of mental health issues looks very different than somebody who doesn't have all this the sort of boatloads of privilege.
Hmm.
Um, but even for me, I mean, I remember when I was 18 or 19, and it was suggested to me that I might have something called depression. I thought depression was just the name of a weather condition. I and this happened in spite of the fact that my mom was a nurse, so I
Hmm.
wasn't unfamiliar with medical terms and conditions. But even for me, I think it was so far out that I was shocked. I ran away from the therapist's clinic and never went back for the next 5 years because I was terrified. Um,
Hmm.
and today, I think, what COVID has done is, I think it's a bit more nuanced than a simple case of people developing greater awareness. I think what
Hmm.
has happened is um, a section of society which was always struggling and living with a huge amount of psychological stress. And these are people who are traditionally vulnerable, marginalized communities. They were screaming and they were saying, look, this is happening to us, pay attention. And we didn't. And then COVID came for all of us. And suddenly, people like me were like, oh, okay, this is real. Like this suffering is real. And I think through our privilege, we started validating and legitimizing these conditions. Um, and what got projected in the media, etc., as growing awareness of mental health concerns was basically, a phenomenon where the privileged elite said, "Oh, this is now beginning to happen to us as well. We better pay attention to this." So it wasn't as if all of society was unaware. Maybe the sections of society that were most impacted by mental health challenges did not have the language to name their problems, the diagnostic labels, but they were struggling. What COVID did was it kind of magnified those struggles, and it kind of became more mainstream because now the sort of elite English speaking part of society was beginning to talk about this. So, yeah, that nuance is important. Having said that, of course, I think the one big um, sort of outcome, which is kind of, I think extremely disruptive that has come out of COVID is the sort of influx of technology solutions in mental health. And we can talk more about that later. Um, and how that has both resulted in increased awareness of mental health issues, but also the propensity to ask for help. Now, what kind of help people are getting from these apps, etc., AI-led bots, etc., that is a different question. That's a can of worms. But I think one of the bigger legacies of COVID is the rise of tech in mental health. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you also mentioned a very important thing. मैं तो बहुत टाइम से यही सुनती आ रही हूँ कि ये जो मेंटल हेल्थ प्रॉब्लम्स हैं ये अमीरों की बीमारी है. बट व्हेन आई वाज डूइंग दिस ग्लोबल मेंटल हेल्थ लीडरशिप कोर्स विद संगत, आई रियलाइज्ड कि नहीं, ऐसा नहीं है. मतलब ये पर्सपेक्टिव पहले इतना बाहर नहीं जाता था, बट ही पुट इट फॉरवर्ड, द वन ऑफ द इंस्ट्रक्टर्स, वेरी क्लियरली कि ऐसा क्यों नहीं है और क्यों ये हर सेक्शन की प्रॉब्लम है. नाउ बिकॉज a lot of people are aware about it, we are also seeing ये जो जितने भी टर्म्स है, जैसे आपने डिप्रेशन का नाम लिया कि आपको पता ही नहीं था कि डिप्रेशन होता क्या है. और मैं भी छोटी थी, मुझे याद है माई मदर यूज टू यूज दिस टर्म अगर कोई परेशान होता था कि वो
Hmm.
डिप्रेशन में, उनको किसी को पता नहीं है, मतलब डायग्नोस्ड भी नहीं है, बट डिप्रेशन कहना फिर भी उस वक्त भी कुछ ना कुछ नॉर्मल था. और
Hmm.
अभी तो मतलब डिप्रेशन हो गया, ओसीडी हो गया, या एंग्जाइटी
हम्म,
हो गया, नार्सिसिज्म हो गया, ट्रॉमा हो गया, ये सब बिल्कुल कॉमनली यूज होने लगे हैं और पॉप
हम्म,
कल्चर का बिल्कुल पार्ट बन चुके हैं। तो
हम्म।
ये जो इन टर्म्स का काइंड ऑफ केयरलेस यूज है, जिसको लेके कई लोग वरी भी करते हैं कि अंडरमाइन कर रहे हैं रियल सिचुएशन को, इसके बारे में आपके क्या थॉट्स हैं?
देखिए इसके बारे में बात करने से पहले मुझे लगता है कि हमें थोड़ा पीछे जाना पड़ेगा।
हम्म,
जैसे आपने जिक्र किया कि ये सारे प्रॉब्लम्स पहले भी थे, दीज आर हिस्टोरिकल प्रॉब्लम्स, एंड these are problems that, like I said, have always disproportionately affected the marginalized communities. अब वो जेंडर माइनॉरिटीज हो सकते हैं, वो सेक्सुअल माइनॉरिटीज हो सकते हैं, कास्ट, रिलीजन, और ऑब्वियसली पॉवर्टी, उस एक्सेस में जो लोग हैं, um, वो हमेशा से चीख रहे थे, लेकिन उनके आवाज को एम्पलीफाई नहीं किया जाता था, और अभी भी नहीं किया जाता है। अभी थोड़ा सा शायद बढ़ा है, लेकिन अभी भी नहीं किया जाता है। और मेरे जैसे दिखने वाले या मेरे जैसे बोलने वाले लोग ही ऐसे पॉडकास्ट के प्लेटफॉर्म्स में ज्यादा मिलेंगे आपको। अम,
हम्म,
तो पहली बात तो ये है कि वी हैव टू एक्नॉलेज द फैक्ट दैट आई व्हेन आई स्टार्टेड राइटिंग अबाउट मेंटल हेल्थ, तो मैंने एक वेन डायग्राम बनाया था। और वो वेन डायग्राम में क्या था कि एक सर्कल था रिच पीपल विद डिप्रेशन, द अदर सर्कल वाज पुअर पीपल विद डिप्रेशन, और वो दोनों सर्कल्स का जो इंटरसेक्शन था वो था अंकल्स विद अनवांटेड ओपिनियन। तो ये था कि डिप्रेशन चाहे किसी का भी हो, किसी किसी के जिंदगी में भी हुआ हो, लेकिन बहुत सारे ऐसे अंकल्स मिल जाएंगे, और मैं किसी पर्टिकुलर किसी के पर्टिकुलर अंकल को मैं डिमीन नहीं कर रहा हूँ, बट यू नो व्हाट आई
हम्म,
मीन। ऐसे लोग आपको सोसाइटी में मिल जाएंगे जिनके पास बथेरे जो हैं अनवांटेड ओपिनियंस होंगे, और वो आपके
हम्म,
ऊपर वो थोपेंगे, और वो अम, तो ये पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से मैंने अपनी जर्नी स्टार्ट की थी कि कुछ लोग हैं, जैसे व्हेन आई स्टार्टेड सीकिंग हेल्प, एंड आई वेंट टू अ साइकियाट्रिस्ट एंड आई वेंट टू अ थेरेपिस्ट. So there were people who came and told me that, Arey, why do you need to go and pay somebody? Just talk to somebody at home. तो लोगों को पहले तो यही समझ नहीं है हमारे सोसाइटी में कि बहुत सारे मुश्किलों की जड़ जो है वो घर ही होती है हमारी, जो घर से और फैमिली से ही जो प्रॉब्लम्स होते हैं,
या,
उनके बारे में बात करने के लिए हम कहाँ जाएं, राइट?
हम्म,
So I used to be very angry, why are these people um, coming and giving me all this rubbish opinion? Why can't they be more sensitive? Why can't they be more aware and enlightened? Um, and now that I have been doing this work for 7-8 years, 7-8 साल पहले तो मेंटल हेल्थ के बारे में मेन स्ट्रीम में बात करना, बीइंग अ मैन, बीइंग अ जर्नलिस्ट, वाज कंसिडर्ड रेडियो एक्टिव। मतलब आपने वो कर दिया तो इसका मतलब आपको कहीं नौकरी नहीं मिलेगी, आप बिल्कुल धकेल दिए जाओगे मार्जिन्स पे। बट बिकॉज आई हैड सो मच प्रिविलेज, मुझे उतना वो इशू अफ्लिक्ट नहीं किया। बट स्टिल उस टाइम पे मुझे समझ नहीं आती थी कि लोग ऐसे क्रूडली क्यों बात करते हैं, तो मुझे गुस्सा आता था, right?
हम्म,
I used to be very annoyed, and I used to write very angry posts, and I used to, whenever I used to go on forums like this, I used to rail at, this sort of injustice, and why are people so thoughtless, and why are people so insensitive?
हम्म,
Today, I have come to realize that that may not be a very, very productive or very sort of like, um, eh, we can't progress if we keep thinking of people in those terms all the time. That when people use, मैंने भी बहुत पढ़ा है कि अच्छा आजकल तो लोग बात बात पे ट्रॉमा शब्द का इस्तेमाल कर देते हैं, उनको पता भी है कि
हम्म,
ट्रॉमा क्या होता है। जैसे
हम्म,
कोई कुछ मूवी देखने गया, वापस आया, बोला इतना खराब पिक्चर था कि मैं ट्रॉमेटाइज हो गया, राइट?
हम्म,
तो
हम्म,
and then people ridicule that, people get angry, and I understand where that anger comes from, right? The anger comes from the fact that if people who are not actually living with trauma start using this carelessly, then those who are actually living with that very serious challenge, um, it sucks the oxygen out of that conversation, right?
हम्म,
And I understand that. या फिर जैसे लोग बोलते हैं कि यार the food was very depressing, in this
हम्म,
party
या,
or whatever, right? I think as an advocate doing my little small time advocacy, मुझे याद है कि जब मैंने बात करना चालू किया था तो मुझे कुछ नहीं पता था,
हम्म।
मैं बहुत स्टिग्मेटाइजिंग लैंग्वेजेस यूज करता था, खुद को डिस्क्राइब करने के लिए भी और बाकी लोगों को डिस्क्राइब करने के लिए भी, क्योंकि हमारे एजुकेशन सिस्टम में हमें सिखाया ही नहीं जाता है।
या।
मेंटल हेल्थ लेबल्स तो बहुत दूर की बात है, राइट? बॉडी शेमिंग हमारे लैंग्वेज का हिस्सा होता है व्हेन वी आर ग्रोइंग अप, राइट? किसी को भी
हाँ।
फैट, मोटा बोल देना, किसी को भी अंधा बोल देना, बहरा बोल देना, ये सब हमारे ग्रोइंग अप स्टेजेस में हमारे अंदर घुसा दिया जाता है कि ये नॉर्मल है, ऐसे ही बात करो, राइट?
हम्म।
तो पता कैसे चलेगा इंसान को, राइट? अब मैं बहुत फॉर्चुनेट था कि मुझे इतने मेंटर्स और फ्रेंड्स मिले जिन्होंने मुझे जेंटली समझाया, और जिनके वजह से, और खुद मैंने अपना प्रिविलेज का इस्तेमाल करते हुए आई एजुकेटेड माई सेल्फ ऑल्सो,
हम्म।
राइट? क्योंकि ये भी है कि किसी और का काम नहीं, अगर आपके पास इतना प्रिविलेज है कि आप इंटरनेट पे जा सको और वीडियोस देख सको और पढ़ सको, तो आप एक्सक्यूज नहीं दे सकते कि हाँ मुझे नहीं पता था। एक लेवल के बाद जाके वो एक्सक्यूज चलेगी नहीं आपकी, राइट?
हम्म।
और वो फेयर भी नहीं है कि आप हमेशा वो एक्सक्यूज दो। लेकिन हर कोई जरूरी नहीं है कि आप अपने एवोल्यूशन के जिस पॉइंट पे हैं, दैट एवरीबडी इज ऑन दैट पॉइंट, right?
हम्म।
Even if that person comes from a very elite family, even if that person comes from, you know, a wealthy background or whatever, English speaking, metropolitan, the level of awareness, the level of sensitivity towards mental health issues and disability in general is so abysmal in our society that you cannot blame individuals for this. This is a structural problem. This is a systemic problem. Now,
हम्म।
this does not mean that we should not try and correct individuals, right? And I'm not going to speak on behalf of anyone. I think activists who have been working in this space for decades, I understand why they get so angry and frustrated, right? Because they have been, it's like they're banging their head against a wall and people just don't listen, right?
हम्म।
But in my own very limited experience, what I have found useful is to not assume that everyone is doing this out of bad faith, right? That it is possible that they just don't know. Now, what's the strategy then to tackle with this? Sure, you can put a friendly arm around their shoulders and try to explain it to them if they're willing to listen. But you can't beyond a point, as an advocate, you can't make an ally out of everyone, right?
Yeah.
It entirely depends on where in their evolution they are at that moment. And it's not your job to make everyone see the light. First of all, I have so much to learn. I make mistakes all the time. So I don't presume that I know everything. And secondly, when I see somebody making a mistake, my approach is to first gauge, is this person interested in improving? Because my energy is finite, you know. Um, and then I try to have a friendly conversation. And then I move on if I see that this person's not willing to learn. Um, Yeah, that's it. I don't think beyond a point there is any point in getting angry and frustrated about this. The scale of the problem is huge, you know.
हम्म।
And सिर्फ जाके कहीं पे सोशल मीडिया पे दो रैंट्स लिख देने से ये प्रॉब्लम सॉल्व नहीं होने वाला है। और वो रैंट्स लिखना भी बिल्कुल लेजिटिमेट है। वो भी, that is completely okay. It used to work for me at one point. It no longer works for me. And I have full respect for those who feel like ranting. It just doesn't work for me anymore.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and Tanmoy, do you also feel that this careless or maybe rather popular usage, common usage of such terms help in any way?
This is a very interesting question, I think allowing people, or when people feel that they can speak about their inner lives, right? In
Mm.
whatever language, right? That has to be a net positive. When people start claiming space for their personal experiences, for their struggles, I look at that as a net positive development, right? Because we have to remember that for centuries this was so badly stigmatized. And we are just about seeing an uncorking of that, right?
Mhm.
That all that bottled up emotion, it's just beginning to bubble out. So आप जब एक टैप खोलते हैं बहुत सालों तक बंद रहने के बाद, तो उसमें से कचरा निकलेगा ना,
Mhm.
राइट? एकदम साफ पानी थोड़ी निकलने लग जाएगा, राइट?
Mhm.
और वो टैप तक भी वही लोग पहुंचेंगे जिनके पास रिसोर्सेज हैं, और फिर भी गंदा पानी निकलेगा, और उसको हमको फिल्टर आउट होने देना पड़ेगा, राइट? नहीं तो कॉन्वर्सेशन आगे नहीं बढ़ पाएगी। और वो फिल्टर
Mhm.
आउट करने के अपने अपने तरीके हैं। आप एजुकेट कीजिए लोगों को, आप गुस्सा हो जाइए, आप ट्रेनिंग प्रोग्राम्स चलाइए, आप आपको जो ठीक लगे आप वो कीजिए. बट ये नेट पॉजिटिव है, टैप खुलना नेट पॉजिटिव है. नाउ सी, दिस इज एन एक्सट्रीमली delicate matter, because what is happening, there is also a pushback, which is that हर कोई आजकल अपने स्ट्रगल्स को लेकर इतना अवेयर और कॉन्शियस हो गया है, यू नो, real struggles, perceived struggles, whatever it is. The people have become so, um, especially people with privilege, they've become so used to saying, this is my truth, right?
Hmm.
So I have read articles which say that, if everyone gets preoccupied with their own truths, then we are going to stop looking after each other, right?
Hmm.
For instance, some time ago, there was this controversy in social media about trauma dumping, right, on friends. Like, कि मैंने किसी दोस्त को फोन करके मुझे अपनी किसी चीज के बारे में
Hmm.
बात करनी है, that I'm suffering from something or I'm struggling. But before that, should I take permission from my friend, right?
Hmm.
Hey, are you in a place where you can listen to me, so
Hmm.
that I can talk to you, right? And इसका एक बहुत बड़ा बैकलैश भी आया था. बहुत लोगों ने कहा था हाँ ऐसे ही होना चाहिए, क्योंकि आपको नहीं पता कि दूसरा इंसान किस स्टेट में है, तो आप जाकर के तुरंत अपने ट्रिगरिंग कुछ बातें बोलना चालू कर दोगे. एक तो ये ट्रिगरिंग जो शब्द है, ये था ही नहीं हमारे डिक्शनरी में आज से 5 साल पहले भी. आजकल हम
हर
लोग
जगह से
हर
बात है.
बात पे ट्रिगर्ड शब्द का इस्तेमाल कर देते हैं.
Yeah.
तो एक तरफ से लोगों ने कहा कि नहीं, दिस इज हाउ इट शुड ऑलवेज बी, यू शुड रिस्पेक्ट बाउंड्रीज, यू शुड रिस्पेक्ट स्पेस.
Hmm.
On the other hand, there was this backlash that, hang on, where are we going as a civilization? Like, it's great that people are owning up to there and demanding more space, for their experiences. But are we now coming to a point where to talk to a friend, you will have to seek permission and take an appointment?
Hmm.
So how much is it helping people, the normalization of this therapy language, right? Therapy speak.
Hmm.
This is a can of worms. I
Hmm.
feel that, इंडिविजुअल्स के ऊपर इसका क्या असर हो रहा है, ये तो इट्स एनीबॉडीज गेस. वी कांट स्पीक ऑन बिहाफ ऑफ एवरी सिंगल इंडिविजुअल. But I
Hmm.
think as a society, I am hopeful. I want to be hopeful. I want to feel that, this is a net positive, that the tap has been opened. Now we have to sit with in therapy, there is this idea of sitting with one's discomfort, right? Sitting with your distress, sitting with your discomfort. Engage with it, कुछ करो मत, आप उसको experience करो बस उस distress को, right? So what is happening right now is forcing a lot of us to sit with a lot of discomfort. कि कोई आकर के हमको गलत लैंग्वेज बोल के चला जाएगा,
Hmm.
तो या तो हम एकदम तुरंत से रिस्पॉन्ड करें या रिएक्ट करें उसके ऊपर, या फिर हम बोलें कि यार इट दिस इज द टेस्ट. If we want this ecosystem, if we want this conversation to mature, that will not happen uh, without going through this period of chaos and distress.
You also said a very interesting thing about trauma dumping. अगर मेरे साथ कुछ हो रहा होता तो आई वुड हैव कॉल्ड माई मदर और मे बी अ बेस्ट फ्रेंड और उसको मैंने सब बता दिया होता. लाइक मेरे हस्बैंड जब 2 साल पहले बीमार पड़े थे तो आई हैड कॉल्ड माई फ्रेंड्स, ये फील हो रहा है, ऐसा हो रहा है, ये हो रहा है, वो रहा, सब मैंने उनको बता दिया था एंड दे वर देयर फॉर मी. आई
Hmm.
हैड समवन टू टॉक टू. यू टोल्ड मी टू व्यूज कि एक तो होता है लोग कहते हैं कि नहीं करना चाहिए, परमिशन लेनी चाहिए. एक दूसरा सेक्शन कहता है कि नहीं, दे आर योर फ्रेंड्स एंड यू डोंट नीड देयर परमिशन. इज देयर अ रॉन्ग और राइट? हैव यू पिक्ड योर साइड?
Yeah, I have picked my side. I'm not sure I'm entirely, convinced about how I came to this point. Because अब वो हर किसी के अपने दोस्तों के ऊपर भी डिपेंड करता है, वो सर्कल कैसा है, आपके ग्रुप डायनामिक्स कैसे हैं, अलग अलग चीजें होती हैं. The thing is, many of us, we are not, we live very far away from our friends, right? Um, I live in a small mountain town. I don't have any friends there. All my friends are in metros. I have removed myself from the metro ecosystem. Now, distance is a natural outcome of some life choices like this, right? Um, and then you feel, with every passing day that you don't call a friend, you know, you're also denying them the opportunity to speak to you and seek help, right? Um, Help seeking has to work both ways. And help seeking is about, especially with friends, right? Not with professionals, but with friends, help seeking has to be both ways. When you are physically so far away from your friends, right? already there is a little bit of distance that starts creeping in. And then I've often wondered, like, I have a close friend who's known me for more than half my life. I mean, she's known me since I was 18 years old. And I'm going to be 41. So the other day I was texting her and I was thinking of, like I was something was really rankling me, something was really bothering me. And I was texting her and I found myself lapsing into this sort of like after writing every sentence, I was deleting it and rewriting it, right? कोई spontaneity बचा ही नहीं है। क्योंकि मुझे
हम्म
लग रहा था अरे यार मुझे नहीं पता। अब ये एक ऐसी दोस्त है जो मुझे 23 साल से जानती है और मैं आई वॉज लाइक ओके आई वॉज सो कन्फ्लिक्टेड। आई वॉज लाइक
हम्म
हाँ शायद मुझे जो अभी मन में आ रहा है वो लिख देना चाहिए। और फिर मुझे तुरंत लग रहा था कि नहीं यार मैंने जो सीखा है इतने साल ये काम करने के बाद वो मुझे ये बताती है कि नहीं आप किसी के ऊपर ऐसे सडनली जाकर क्योंकि उसके भी अपने प्रॉब्लम्स होंगे तो मुझे थोड़ा लैंग्वेज केयरफुली यूज करना चाहिए। अब ये चीजें इसका क्या सही और क्या गलत
हम्म
ये कोई सही गलत के दायरे से बहुत बाहर चला गया ये पूरा चीज अब।
हम्म
और मुझे नहीं पता हम लोग सारे हाथ पैर मार रहे हैं इस भवंडर में और किसी को नहीं पता कि कौन सा क्या सही है क्या क्या गलत है। बट मुझे लगता है कि ये थोड़ा सा पॉलिटिकल भी है क्योंकि लिबरल्स और कॉन्जर्वेटिव्स में ये चीजें बढ़ जाती हैं राइट।
हम्म
मैंने देखा है कि द कंजर्वेटिव पॉलिटिकल पॉलिटिकल फैक्शन एक तो दे थिंक दैट ऑल ऑफ दिस इज जस्ट वोक राइट।
हम्म
कि यार व्हाट इज दिस लाइक व्हाई डू यू हैव टू टॉक लाइक दिस व्हाट इज दिस लैंग्वेज दिस इज वियर्ड दिस इज स्पॉइलिंग आवर फ्यूचर जनरेशंस दे आर बिकमिंग स्नोफ्लेक्स। एक कंजर्वेटिव पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू ये है। लिबरल पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू दूसरा है। लिबरल पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू इज मोर अबाउट रिस्पेक्टिंग पर्सनल स्पेस रिस्पेक्टिंग बाउंड्रीज। सो ये पॉलिटिकल भी हो गया और क्योंकि पॉलिटिकल पोलराइजेशन हमारी सोसाइटी में इतना डीप हो चुका है अब तो ये सारी चीजें भी अब लोगों को बांट रही हैं। और मुझे नहीं पता मुझे कभी कभी लगता है कि अब पता नहीं कि हम कहाँ जा रहे हैं आई डोंट नो मतलब आई हैव अ फेवरेट ऑथर फ्रेडरिक बैकमैन और आई रेड अ बुक where he talks about the 10 things he wants his son to know when he grows up एंड वहाँ पे उन्होंने एक बहुत ही हिलेरियस लाइन लिखा था जो कि बहुत एक्चुअली फनी भी है और नहीं भी है एंड दैट वाज पेरेंट्स ऑफ आवर जनरेशन नो वी हैव given up on the idea of trying to be perfect parents and we will be happy if when our child is 19 and they're sitting in front of a therapist because they're definitely going to end up in therapy
हम्म
uh, and they're sitting in front of a therapist and the therapist listens to their problems and just says that yeah maybe all of this is not your parents fault you know uh, तो सही गलत क्या हम सिखा रहे हैं क्या हम दे रहे हैं अगले जनरेशन को ऑनेस्टली कोई भी जो आके मुझे बोलता है कि उसको सर्टेनिटी के साथ या डेफिनेटिवली एक चीज पता है या कन्विक्शन है मैं थोड़ा सस्पिशियस हो जाता हूँ क्योंकि क्या
हम्म
पॉसिबल है ऐसे एनवायरनमेंट में कुछ भी डेफिनेटिव बोल पाना मुझे नहीं पता।
आई एग्री विद यू। शुरू में आपने भी बोला लिव्ड एक्सपीरियंस और
हम्म
अभी हर कोई अपना एक्सपीरियंस वैलिड बताता है एंड ऑब्वियसली ऑल एक्सपीरियंसेस आर वैलिड बट अभी सोशल मीडिया पे ये बहुत हो गया है कि हाँ ये मैंने फील किया है ये भी वैलिड है जो तुमने फील किया है वो वैलिड नहीं है। एक ये भी है चीज़ जो मुझे बहुत दिखने लगी है आजकल हर हर जगह।
हम्म
और फिर उसके बाद अगर हर कोई इन टर्म्स को केयरलेसली यूज कर रहा है लाइक यू सेड वी नीड टू एजुकेट लिव्ड एक्सपीरियंस हम लोग चाह रहे हैं कि उनको भी कंसिडर किया जाए कि ऐसा नहीं है कि हमें हमेशा जो प्रोफेशनल्स हैं साइकोलॉजिस्ट हैं या थेरेपिस्ट
हम्म
हैं उनकी ही बात को सुनना है। अगर सिंपल टर्म्स में बोलूँ लिव्ड एक्सपीरियंस वालों का भी जो एक्सपीरियंस है जो उनके थॉट्स हैं वो भी वैलिड हैं बट जो
हम्म
ये केयरलेस यूज है ये
हम्म
कहाँ फिट होता है फिर लिव्ड एक्सपीरियंस में कि फिर तो ये होगा कि अब जब हर चीज़ वैलिड है तो कुछ भी वैलिड नहीं है या फिर सब कुछ वैलिड है लाइक तो लिव्ड
करेक्ट
एक्सपीरियंस कहाँ फिट होता है एंड आई ऑल्सो वॉन्ट टू बिफोर यू स्पीक ऑन दिस प्लीज ऑल्सो clarify lived experience a bit for our listeners.
श्योर थैंक यू। आई थिंक एक चीज तो है कि मुझे लगता है कि the adjective that I prefer instead of careless usage the adjective that I
Mm.
prefer is maybe ill-informed usage or misinformed
Mhm.
usage
Mhm.
rather than careless. um, lived experience क्या है now lived experience owes its origins to the feminist movement it has direct connections with the gender struggle, right? And today, बहुत पानी बह चुका है. Lived experience in the sphere of uh, mental health.
Hmm.
Um, it has become intertwined with, one way or the other, it has become intertwined with people who live with a clinical condition, right?
Hmm.
Which means that they have a diagnosis, right? क्योंकि क्लिनिकल कंडीशन तो आपका तभी माना जाएगा जब आपके पास एक डायग्नोसिस होगा जो किसी डॉक्टर ने आपको लिख
हाँ,
के
and I
दिया है.
also remember you mentioned somewhere कि it does not come with a doctor's prescription or something with a
एग्जैक्टली
doctor's diagnosis, है ना? You did mention कि lived experience का मतलब सिर्फ diagnosis नहीं है.
एग्जैक्टली. सो बेसिकली जो चीज, दिस टर्म दैट वाज that was used during the feminist movement to talk about the inner experiences and the unique struggles of being a woman, that were not finding space in the canonical sort of mainstream conversation. आज हम एक ऐसे पोजीशन पे पहुंच गए हैं जहां पे एक तरफ तो ये बहुत एम्पावरिंग है, लाइक यू सेड दैट देर आर डिमांड्स दैट पीपल विथ लिव्ड एक्सपीरियंस शुड आल्सो बी कंसिडर्ड एक्सपर्ट्स, एंड दे आर experts, but what are they experts on? They're experts on their own life, their own life experiences. I am a lived experience expert, but I can't speak for you. I can't even speak for somebody who looks exactly like me and talks exactly like me. I can only speak on my behalf, right? So, lived experience advocacy, मुझे लगता है कि the most impactful and the most sort of ethical use of lived experience advocacy should come with this disclaimer that I am not speaking on behalf of every lived experience expert, right? And this does not in any way undermine the knowledge, wisdom, expertise of people with training and qualification, therapists, psychiatrists, researchers, psychologists. It is merely a way of establishing parity, establishing a respectful relationship. Now, people think parity means, that they are interchangeable. No, they are not interchangeable. Parity purely means that when I walk into a therapist's clinic as a person with lived experience or a doctor's clinic, I have the right to be taken seriously. Simply put, I have the right to present my story and to be and for that story to be taken as valid and legitimate without somebody coming in. जैसे पहले क्या होता था, पहले especially for women, there was this diagnosis called hysteria. What
Hmm.
was hysteria? Hysteria was any woman who was trying to assert herself, right? Any woman who did not fit into societal norms would run the risk of being called hysterical, right?
Hmm.
Now, and it was a proper diagnosis. And psychiatry का ये बहुत बड़ा legacy रहा है, बहुत पुराना legacy रहा है, जहाँ पे bogus diagnoses were whipped up, to keep, like, for instance, when, in the days of slavery in North America, there were diagnostic terms that were invented to suppress, oppress, and torture, and sort of to benefit slave owners, right?
Hmm.
So, एक lived experience का ये कहना है कि lived experience experts का ये कहना है कि नहीं, आप ये नहीं कर सकते, हम आपसे नीचे नहीं है हायरार्की में. क्योंकि डॉक्टर के क्लिनिक में, थेरेपिस्ट के क्लिनिक में एक डिफॉल्ट हायरार्की होता है कि वो लोग हमसे ऊपर होते हैं क्योंकि उनको ज्यादा पता है. और लिव्ड एक्सपीरियंस एक्सपर्ट्स का ये मानना है कि आपको कुछ पता है और मुझे कुछ पता है, किसी को ज्यादा या कम नहीं पता है.
Hmm.
अब now what happens is the moment you say this, it is perceived by a lot of people as an attack on expertise that is gleaned by studying and going to colleges and schools. ये attack नहीं है,
Hmm.
right? This is just a plea to coexist and to say, look, take me seriously. Don't poo-poo my experience as hysteria or whatever, that I'm crazy, I'm insane, and therefore I can't be taken seriously. Um, but having said all of this, I think what intrigues me as an observer, as a student, is this question about whether lived experience rightfully belongs to only people with a diagnosis, because these are, and I consider I am a part of that, right? Um, when we get affronted by somebody else saying, I also have experience and my experience is no less valid than yours, right? And then I'm
Hmm.
like, whoa, 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 but hang on, dude, like, you are not part of this club unless you have this diagnosis written down on a piece of paper. Show me, prove it to me that you have lived experience.
Hmm.
The reality is, मतलब सोसाइटी का एक इतना छोटा फ्रैक्शन डायग्नोसिस जिंदगी में कभी एक्सेस कर पाएगा,
True.
बिकॉज ऑफ स्टिग्मा, बिकॉज ऑफ द कॉस्ट ऑफ ट्रीटमेंट। कितने लोग जा पाएंगे क्लिनिक तक और डायग्नोसिस लेके आएंगे?
Mm-hmm.
और
Yeah.
क्यों चाहिए कि कोई डायग्नोसिस आपको दिखा? आप कौन होते हो, मैं कौन होता हूं किसी के लिव्ड एक्सपीरियंस को नकारने नकारने वाला?
Mm.
नाउ of course there are going to be, charlatans. There are going to be people who will, especially like aajkal to everybody calls themselves a healer, a therapist, whatever, right? ये भी मैं बहुत सुनता हूँ
Mm.
आजकल, तो बड़े सब लोग ऐसे बोलने लग गए हैं.
Mm.
Will this, will the unethical use of some of these terms and, sort of appropriation of some of these experiences cause harm? 100%. I think they will cause harm. And again, the people who will get harmed will not be people like me. They will be people at the on the margins, right?
Mm.
But मैं अब, like I said, I can only speak for myself. मुझे नहीं लगता कि मुझे कोई हक है किसी से ये मांगने का कि आप जाके पहले पहले आप दिखाओ डायग्नोसिस, अपना प्रिस्क्रिप्शन दिखाओ, तो ही मैं मानूंगा कि आपका। इफ आई पर्सनली फील दैट मैं बहुत प्रिविलेज्ड हूं कि मुझे डायग्नोसिस मिला, राइट?
Mm.
अब किसी के पास नहीं है तो ये मतलब नहीं है कि उसको लिव्ड एक्सपीरियंस एक्सपर्ट कहलाने का अपने अपने को हक नहीं है।
Mm.
बट अब कोई अगर, नाउ सी, दिस इज डिफरेंट फ्रॉम सेल्फ डायग्नोसिस, and this is
Mm.
important,
Yeah.
right? Because a lot of young people today, they are very vulnerable to this, right? And a lot has been written about it. इंटरनेट पे आप जाते हैं, आप 4 आर्टिकल्स पढ़ते हैं और आप खुद को डायग्नोसिस एक दे देते हैं, खुद को
Mm.
डायग्नोस कर लेते हैं दैट आई एम डिप्रेस्ड और आई हैव स्किज़ोफ्रेनिया और आई हैव ओसीडी और व्हाट। दिस इज एक्सट्रीमली डेंजरस बिकॉज दीज आर वेरी 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 loaded clinical terms. They should
Mm.
not be used. And once again, it is not the young people's fault. We have
Mm-hmm.
pushed young people in our society into a corner such that, हम उनकी बात सुनते नहीं है, तो वो क्या करेंगे? वो एक दूसरे के साथ बात करेंगे. They will confine themselves in what I call these digital dungeons where adults are not allowed access. और
Mm.
कोई अडल्ट चला भी जाएगा तो अडल्ट को खुद तो पता होगा नहीं, वो जाके उसको डांट लगाएगा या फिर उसको कुछ बोल देगा और वो जिंदगी भर फिर किसी से हेल्प नहीं मांगेगा वो बच्चा, राइट? सो
Mm.
सेल्फ डायग्नोसिस जो है वो बहुत डेंजरस है, एंड दैट इज डिफरेंट, दैट वो अलग चीज है. बट
Mm.
मुझे नहीं लगता कि लिव्ड एक्सपीरियंस किसी कोई क्लब होना चाहिए जहां पे सिर्फ उन्हीं लोगों को एंट्री मिलेगी जिनके पास एक पेपर में लिखा हुआ कुछ डायग्नोसिस है.
Mm-hmm. तो कौन है लिव्ड एक्सपीरियंस वाले लोग जिनको आप लिव्ड एक्सपीरियंस एक्सपर्ट बोलते हो कि डायग्नोसिस नहीं चाहिए और सेल्फ डायग्नोज भी नहीं करना है? तो फिर और मेंटल हेल्थ वाला हम बात कर रहे हैं कि लिव्ड एक्सपीरियंस विद मेंटल हेल्थ इश्यूज, तो एग्जैक्टली क्या है फिर ये?
एक बेंचमार्क मुझे लगता है कि जो मुझे लगता है कि सही है, वो एक बेंचमार्क ये है कि when a condition becomes debilitating for you, right? When a condition affects your daily functioning and it becomes debilitating, right? Um, that should be the base criterion, right? That then you know that this is not just, existential angst or, just sort of like the usual day-to-day suffering, sadness, difficult emotions that all of us experience. When something is a recurring problem, when something becomes debilitating and disabling even, right? Then you know that this is an experience that perhaps not everybody has,
Mm.
right? Now, whether you are able to then find the help that you need and you are able to understand that you have something called lived experience expertise, that is completely a function of privilege. But I think
Mm.
if you ask yourself this question, is this a persistent, recurring problem and is it becoming debilitating? Is it affecting my quality of life? Am I not able to function as a human being? All of which I have been through, right? And a lot of
Mm.
others have too. The difference is I have been able to get, words for it, terms for it. Others may not have been able to.
So, Tanmoy, I learned a lot in this conversation of almost 40 minutes now. Whoever is listening to this conversation, if you want them to take something away from this, so what would that be?
Um, the thing about having these conversations is that you don't remember everything that you've said. You feel like you've ranted and rumbled so much, but I think I can share what I have been trying to remind myself. It, it is that the most the most exhilarating and the most sort of the most liberating and the most heartbreaking moment um, in a person's life is the same. That is the same moment. It's the moment when you realize that you aren't unique, really. It is liberating because then you feel that you are not alone. you know
Mm.
and it is heartbreaking because you then realize that you are not so special, right?
Mm.
And this is what I try to remind myself every day, that like, yes, I mean, my experience is mine and that is unique, but ultimately none of us is really that unique. I mean, uh, people who are PLUs, especially people like us.
Mm.
Um, and none of us at the same time, each one of us is very unique. So I try to sit with that. I try to make sense of what that means. And I think, and I'm trying to, pass on whatever I have learned. So, like you mentioned that mental health leadership program where you and I met. Um, and now that lived experience session that I have been now holding for the past 2 years, it's been received well by people. I've just started something called School of Sanity, and on Feb 11th is the first public session where I will be talking about this, the lived experience culture wars. Um, so by learning, constantly educating myself, and always reminding myself that मैंने ये काम, I think I was telling you this yesterday when we were chatting. I remind myself all the time that I did not and I still do not do this work समाज कल्याण के लिए.
Mm.
I primarily do this for self-preservation. I am acutely and profoundly disabled by my experience, by my mental illness, for a very large part of the month. और जो मुझे 10 अच्छे दिन मिल जाते हैं जिसमें मैं बहुत कुछ करने की कोशिश करता हूँ टू कॉम्पेंसेट, उस टाइम पे फिर मुझे लगता है कि जितना मैंने सीखा है अ, वो थोड़ा सा शेयर किया जाए. एंड एट द सेम टाइम कभी भी अपने दिमाग में ये ग्रैंडियोस थॉट ना आए कि आई एम सम काइंड ऑफ सेवियर, और मैं जो काम कर रहा हूँ उससे 5 लोगों का भला हो रहा है, शायद हो रहा है एंड पीपल टेल मी, but I
Mhm.
always keep myself grounded and remind myself that I started doing this work because it helped me save myself, and I continue to do it because of that. So yeah, I think anyone who wants to who's grappling with, whether to speak up about their lived experience or not, please don't let anyone pontificate before you and say, yeah, yeah, you must share. No, it's up to you. Um, I was exceptionally fortunate that I did not suffer too much for opening up. But if you are from a section where, speaking up can have terrible consequences, I have had friends who've lost their jobs because they've spoken up. Please don't feel pressured to speak up. There's the cultural pressure बहुत है. और आप
Mhm.
प्लीज उस ट्रैप में मत गिरिए. यू डू यू, whatever makes you happy, whatever gives you peace, um, and yeah, own your expertise, but at the same time, remember that it's only your expertise that is valid in your life, and you can't speak on behalf of anyone else.
Yes, yes. So thank you for that, Tanmoy. And before I let you go, please also tell us कि आप क्या करते हैं and how can people reach out to you?
Sure. So I run this mental health storytelling platform called Sanity. You can check it out, sanitybytanmoy.com. That's SANITYBYTANMOY.com. I also sit on various lived experience panels and committees across the world. I teach. I am a student of the creator economy myself. So I speak about, I share my learnings about being an independent creator. Um, and the other thing that I'm very passionate about, I started my career as a teacher. So this new adventure, this School of Sanity, that's what I'm paying a lot of attention to now. I write, I freelance, I do whatever I have to do to keep the lights on, like any other self-employed person. Um, And yeah, I am the other big part of my identity is I call myself a fumbling father. I'm learning to, figure out this thing called parenting in this very, very complex world. And you can reach out to me either through my website, or you can email me, Tanmoy at sanitybytanmoy.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Tanmoy Goswami, and on Instagram, which I'm terrible at, by the way, but for what it's worth. I stopped using Twitter, so now I have to market all of these different platforms. Nothing that I do, I'm not capital N-O-T, a therapist or a mental health professional. I do not offer any kind of mental health advice. I only share my story. And when you are, I think one important thing is a lot of people, ask friends for therapy recommendations, or, people that they know for therapist recommendations. Um, I, I would say, just be careful before you make a choice, because it's a big, big decision. So do your own due diligence also. I know when people are desperate, they're not in a position, often they just seek whatever help comes their way. But if you are able to, try, go speak to your therapist, figure out whether you're comfortable. Um, Once again, remember that when somebody recommends someone to you, they are doing it based purely on their own experience. That may not work for you. Um, so yeah, that's important, I think.
Thank you so much,
That-
Tanmoy, for sharing your views on pop culture and therapy speak with us. And I hope this conversation helps someone. Yeah, don't shy away from seeking help. And as Tanmoy said, share only when you are ready. अगर आपको ये एपिसोड वैल्यूबल लगा तो प्लीज हेल्प लिटिल फिक्सेस रीच मोर पीपल बाय शेयरिंग इट विद समवन यू केयर अबाउट. यू कैन ऑल्सो गिव अस अ शाउट आउट ऑन इंस्टाग्राम. मेरा हैंडल है @littlepixelspodcast. दिस हेल्प्स मी इन ग्रोइंग द पॉडकास्ट और बहुत सारे और लोगों की हेल्प भी होती है इसको सुन के. आई एम ग्रेटफुल फॉर योर टाइम. अब मिलते हैं नेक्स्ट वेडनेसडे को. तब तक के लिए खुद से प्यार करते रहो और सदा सैसी रहो. बाय.